can just stay there.
So I face you or face the...
First, you will face you and me will face the camera just for a few seconds.
Yeah.
After I introduce you, then just face me.
Okay.
It's a conversation.
Yeah.
It's like a talk show, you know.
Yeah.
So. Sorry.
Yeah.
So let me show that. Bottles.
After you introduce me, then I...
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Okay.
It's just like it's a coffee conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just have to look for a few seconds. Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice online news. Stay with Hyatt for the Hyatt hotels all around the world, and for those who are traveling to Indonesia and Southeast Asia, don't forget to pick up this book called Poverty and Global Recession in Southeast Asia, written by Dr. Aris Anata and Richard Barrichello. They are both editors for this book. It gives you a very good insight about what's going on in Indonesia. And right now I have right here the editor himself, Dr. Aris Anata, who is an expert in Indonesia's economic reforms and as well as policy issues. And we're going to have some insights with Dr. Aris that is going to share what's going to happen in the next, maybe perhaps next 5 years in his own perspective. And right now, let's hear it from Dr. Aris. Dr. Aris, welcome to the National Critics' Choice online news, as well as the Stay with Hyatt column. You have written a very good document on poverty and global recession in Southeast Asia. And a lot of the business travelers and viewers are wanting to find out, what is poverty? They're trying to understand this term because it's widely used, and poverty has different definitions. So we like to know what is the perspective.
Yeah. First of all, this book is about Southeast Asia, not only Indonesia. Yeah, and poverty is a very subjective issue, and some people say that. Some people criticize that when some people say the poverty is declining, that's only statistic. But I think both the pro and those who criticize are correct. The one who say the poverty is declining in Southeast Asia is also correct, because they use the measurement of the calorie intake per person. The measurement, with the same measurement with the calorie intake, poverty has been decreasing in many parts of Southeast Asia. But the issue is that people are not happy, because even though they are already improving their welfare, but their neighbor, their friends are improving much faster. So this relative inequality make people feel poor even though they have been better off compared to 10 or 15 years ago. That's what is happening in Southeast Asia and many parts of the world. Relative inequality. First is relative inequality. Also, the second thing is the absolute poverty. The absolute gap between the income of the lower income group and the higher income group. The absolute gap is also widening, and the lower income group also see the consumption of other people around them. That makes people jealous. And the issue of inequality is also more a political issue, and in politics, perception matters more than the substance. So first, poverty is declining if we measure in terms of calorie intake and clothes and so on, the minimum level. That is declining, and the number of people and percentage of people living under the poverty line is declining. That's correct. But it is also correct that the inequality, relative poverty, is also rising, the widening gap. That's the issue.
Now, so you're saying that it's got to do with the psychological distress that people are facing, even though they're not so poor, but because they are they're making a comparison between their neighbors and their friends. So it's really psychological distress.
Psychological and social. This is what I call the global consumers, but local earners. They are seeing all over the world. They see in the computer, they see the people coming, they consume so many things with the world prices. But if their income is not the world income, their income is still low, they cannot afford it, so they feel deprived. So actually, in terms of absolute income, they are better. Many people are better. Yes, of course, there are some people who are falling down, but in general, the situation is improving. But because the world is moving much faster than they are, so there are people, even those in the middle income group, who feel frustrated, and they cannot consume what others are consuming, and this can create a dangerous political implication.
And speaking about implications, what kind of the poverty and food security uncertainties that is facing in Southeast Asia?
Okay. That's another issue, a strategic issue in the next 20-30 years. And in terms of food, it's not the issue only for the poor, but for everybody. Can we continue eating? Can the world provide sufficient amount of food for us to eat? The issue actually is that if people continue to be greedy like today, they consume so much and waste so much, then the problem of providing food for everybody will become very bad. Today, as you know, that people always buy food, buy this and consume so much. Even in the restaurant, you will see that so much waste is there on the table. If this pattern, too much consumption and become fat and sick, continue, then this is really a big challenge for the world, not only for the poor. But if we could change that one, this pattern, healthy food consumption and efficient food consumption, I believe food will not be an issue for people on the world. But again, the problem is the allocation of food, because often the rich people spend so much money for food, but they don't consume it. They spend money for the livestock, for example, and rather than on the plantation, on vegetable, because livestock eat plantation. So there is the chain of production is too long, and with this kind of consumption, then it deprives the poor to eat food. So the issue actually is not whether we could produce sufficient amount of food for the people, but first is the greediness of the human being in consumption of the food, and the lack of efficiency in consumption, and then the allocation of the food between the rich and the poor.
And speaking about allocations, do you think that the world has enough food for everyone, even within 25 years from now?
If allocation is good, so that if people consume well, consume efficiently, and if people do not follow the greediness, the problem is that the business is creating greediness. The business always show that eat this, consume this, and this one, and we have to pay a lot of money, and they don't care whether we throw away the waste. And then consumption of meat, for example, that is too much too, because first in terms of health, and second that our body does not need that much meat for our health. So if we could live more responsible to our health, that also reduce the need for food. So if we follow healthy lifestyle, the pattern of healthy lifestyle, that also reduce the demand for food, and that's why the food can be allocated more to everybody.
Amazing. And could you explain about the upcoming recession, the possible recession that's coming up, especially what's happening in the United States and the Eurozone, and and inflation as well. It has been increasing rapidly every year, about between 3 to 5%. People are wondering what kind of impact for the world recession on the rural poverty and food security in Southeast Asia, and lessons that's been observed and learned from the 97 to 98 Asian crisis. What will be your perspective in this coming global recession?
The poor always in recession, if not depression, whether or not the world is suffering. But people only talk about suffering worldwide if there is global recession. But when they recover, quote unquote, then they forget about the poor people, and the poor people remain there. That's first. Second, your question about global recession, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not optimistic that we could avoid the next global recession. And the next global recession can be deeper, wider, and longer. Why? Because we have not been able to reform the world financial architecture. The world financial infrastructure is very fragile. We depend so much on the speculative behavior. So it is not the real sector. Financial sector has been dominating the economy of the world. Actually, financial sector is supposed to be the means for production. But when the financial sector has been growing too much, then it is very dangerous. And this is the source of all financial crises in the world. The 2008-2009, the 15 years ago in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, that's because of too much growth of financial sector. As you know now, everywhere in the world, everybody is advertising to borrow money, almost very frequently people call me from financial institution to offer me chance to borrow and borrow and borrow. This is very dangerous.
And free credit cards as well.
Free credit card and so on. And then it's very easy to get credit card today. 20 years ago, it was very difficult to apply for credit card. Now it's too much. Borrow, borrow, borrow. It is very dangerous. It's just a bubble. Then it will explode. And before there is any real reform on financial sector, global crisis is only a matter of time. And this time being is more slowly, but I think it will come. Second global crisis. Before the 2089, the crisis in the world is regional, more regional, not the whole world together. In the 1997, 1999, there's only Southeast Asia, but the world is okay. But 2008 is the global, and then the next one is another global crisis. And who are affected? The middle income, the rich people, and the poor will be affected, but they may not care because they have been suffering for a long time. They know how to cope with the suffering. But the rich people are the one who cry the loudest. The rich people never feel being poor, even though actually they are not really poor, but relatively they will be very poor during the global recession. Actually, their lifestyle is still much higher than poverty line, but they will feel that they are really poor and they are crying the loudest, and they are hurt by many people, many elite in the world, including, I'm sorry to say, including journalists. And so people say, oh, the world is gloomy. But because these people, the elite, are suffering. And for the poor, the really poor, they will remain poor. But they know how to cope better with poverty because they have been used to be poor.
Yeah. So those who are poor remain poor, but they are accustomed to being poor and they don't mind being poor, I think.
This is often that I am always like this. Why did you cry? Yeah, that happened. I experienced myself in 1997, 1999. Well, fortunately, luckily, I was never becoming really poor. But in 1997, 99, I became relatively poor and complain. But talking to the people who are really poor, they were just smiling. No problem. We used to be like this. Then what's the difference?
So who are the real poor in this coming global recession?
The real poor is the one who are also poor, even before the global recession came. They were the one who consume less than the calorie intake supposed to have with the statistic. They are the one who are really poor and the one who are just surviving for everyday life. They are really poor, and they do not know about global recession because they have global depression every day. But thankfully, the percentage of these people are decreasing.
Well, strangely, yes.
But the problem is that the people who could talk to the people in the mass media are not the poor, but the people in the middle class, and the people in the elite. If they are suffering, they will complain. But if they are not suffering, they will forget about the poor.
So you're seeing two groups of poverty.
Mm.
One is
The real poor.
the real poor who
Yeah.
have nothing, but they are accustomed of being poor.
Yeah. And their voice is not heard.
And those who are not poor, but they are middle class income and the rich, who feel that they are deprived of certain privileges and conveniences.
And their neighbors are better, and they are the one who have the strong voice.
Interesting. Now, let's move ahead about your research. You also talk about the education, the employment, and the income equality and poverty as well, and even about Indonesia particularly. What's happening in Indonesia right now today?
In terms of what?
In terms of the policies that have been laid for the poor and also for the welfare of the society. Has that anything been done?
Yeah, Indonesia has been doing a lot to improve the welfare of the poor, to bring people out of the poverty line, but now start to consider inequality. We don't know yet about the result because they just started considering inequality and all other things I mentioned just now about the absolute gap between different level of income.
Mm.
But officially, the program on poverty eradication still focus on reducing the number as percentage of people living under poverty line measured by calorie intake. They still concentrate on that one. But many of the program like mining natural resources, that's not beneficial for improving income inequality.
Really?
Yeah, not beneficial because that is widening income inequality. In the region in Kalimantan, for example, which export coal, then people in that area do not benefit. There are many people are still poor in that area.
Even though they are paid.
Even though they are paid as cheap labor. They are paid as cheap labor. The question is that where does the profit go?
Oh. And how much are they paid in a month? Do you know?
I cannot remember right away, but sometimes they are just paid with the minimum wage.
Oh. And what is the minimum wage today in Indonesia?
Oh, well, relatively better than 10 years ago, because with the reform era, with the democratizing Indonesia, then this has been the right of the people to increase higher wages. So the labor union has become stronger. So people ask higher minimum wage and always revise. It is an improvement, but it does not guarantee too, however, that everybody is paid above or at minimum wage, because there are some practice of outsourcing is allowed. With the outsourcing, then people, the firm doesn't have to pay with the minimum wage. But this is the question again in Indonesia, in many other countries in Southeast Asia too, is that to what extent things should be exported. And there are issues also that Indonesia today is following more to the protectionism, paying interest to the national interest. But I don't know whether what Indonesia is doing correct or not, but my perspective is that we shouldn't see it whether becoming more nationalistic or not. Any government should be nationalistic. Any government should give priority to its citizen. any government in the world like that. So if we criticize Indonesia because Indonesia now pay attention to the citizen, that's not correct criticism. Any government should prioritize for the citizen. And with the current globalization and the crisis coming in the world, every country is now trying to be more protectionist in different part of the economy. Some are very protective for this sector, some are protective this sector, some are in the labor market, and so on. So this protectionism is rising everywhere in the world, including Indonesia. It's not fair for people who attack Indonesia today because Indonesia has a rising economic nationalism. I think every country should have national interests. The government should prioritize the interests of the citizen. That's very legitimate. Not only legitimate, that's a must for the government. If a government doesn't pay attention, does not prioritize the welfare and the interests of the citizen, then the government should go. So the question is not, the critics shouldn't that the government prioritize for the citizen, but whether that policy is good for the people in the country.
And so, what is the economics and the politics on food right now around the Southeast Asian region, as well as even for Indonesia?
For Indonesia and many other countries too, often there are two kind of policy. First is the food sufficiency, producing the right amount of food so that it could be distributed domestically. The other is using trade. We don't have to produce the food ourselves, but we could buy if we have money. And another policy is that to go to other countries to invest in food production in other country. From there, we buy the food production back to our country. There are three ways depending on the availability of the countries. But the issue now is that food production is competing with other development effort like construction of building, road, industrialization, and so on. Is competing with that one. Palm oil, for example, is competing for the land for producing food. So that is the challenge now. We talk about producing more food, but if development program is not prioritized for production of food, then it's still becoming a big challenge in the future, because more development programs will prioritize for things in the urban area, building, other construction, road, and production of car, motorcycle, and so on, rather than food, because the price of food is cheaper. Another issue in the future is not only food, but more critical is water. Mm-hmm. Water will be very critical commodity and strategic commodity in the future. Without food, we can still survive if we can drink and water. But without water, what can we do? Mm-hmm. So water will be more critical in the future.
And what do you think about the water consumption today? Do you think that the world will have enough water, even at the rate that we're growing? The population growth now today stands about 7 billion as 2012, and they predict that we might hit about 10 billion or more.
I don't blame the population growth. I blame the management of the water. Sometimes it is just too easy to switch the problem, to change the issue from the management of the water into the blaming number of population. If we have 10 million population, if they are good, they could manage the water well, no problem. But we are just blaming the number of population. That is we are switching the issue. The real issue, how to manage the water, how we could clean the water, how could we consume the water more efficiently. That's the issue. And we have to be very efficient on livestock, for example, use a lot of water. If we could reduce the production of livestock, we could reduce the consumption of meat, then we could reduce the use of water, and the water can be used for many other things, for plantation, for drinking. That's what livestock is just an example. Because why? Because it reduced the needs of land, it reduced the need of water, it reduced the need of other resources, and it is also good for our health.
Interesting, and yet very profound. Speaking about health, what's happening with the impact of the global recession with the coping mechanism that's been put in place? Do you think that the world is prepared to face and able to counteract against this
Global crisis.
this particular global crisis?
What I'm afraid is that it is not yet prepared. We don't know yet the solution. If I would suggest that we have to reform drastically the financial architecture. Otherwise, many people are talking about like this one, but the world power don't have the courage yet to change the financial architecture, because so many big interests there for maintaining the current financial structure. What I'm afraid is that it will become another global recession. And second, not only from the financial crisis itself, but also with the climate change. Climate change will worsen the problem of financial crisis, because we haven't done sufficiently to reduce the climate change and to cope with the climate change. This is not that. Climate change can affect food production, water, what you asked me before. Then even though people can change the behavior, then climate change will worsen the issue.
In this 21st century, what's happening with Indonesia right now? Do you think Indonesia is taking steps to provide safety nets for the people to guard against the global crisis? And is or are the people, as well as the government, are they prepared for it?
They do not know that we will have another global crisis.
Oh, they don't.
Indonesia is very confident that they wouldn't be affected much by the global crisis. In 2009, everybody is contracting, not everybody, almost all people are contracting, or at least the economic growth is very low. Indonesia still had a 4.6% growth rate. And then in 2008, 2009, I went to Indonesia, I want to discuss about crisis, people were smiling. What are you talking about? No crisis. So right now, if you go to Indonesia, you interview people about the global crisis, except with the academics that will talk. But if you talk to everybody, crisis, no crisis. So Indonesia is very confident. Your question about social safety net is that the government is working very hard to create a very good social protection system, but it's not yet perfect, but they are trying very hard for making sustainable and just social protection.
Are there any life lessons that countries can learn from Indonesia, when they face a global crisis or any financial upheavals? Because it seems to me that Indonesia is always staying very calm regardless whether there's crisis or no crisis. They don't seem to worry at all. They're not anxious. Is there some particular or peculiar culture that countries can learn from? Or could you give probably at least 3 suggestions or lessons?
I do not know how to answer with just 3 points. But in 19